If you've spent any time digging into the turning points of human civilization, you know that few stories are as dramatic and as overlooked as the rise of modern medicine. Before you and I were born, before the hospitals and antiseptics and vaccines we take for granted, the world was a brutal arena where a simple infection could end a life and epidemics shaped empires. So, before we get into the milestones, I want you to picture the sheer scale of the transformation we're about to unpack. In just a couple of centuries, humanity jumped from bloodletting and superstition to organ transplants, germ theory and antibiotics. And that didn't happen smoothly. It happened through centuries of trial, error, resistance and breakthroughs that changed not only how we heal, but how we survive. That's exactly why this topic matters. Not as trivia, but as knowledge every serious history buff and survival-minded person should understand. Because when you know how we got here, you're better equipped to navigate where medicine may be headed next. You know, early scientific thinkers really set the stage for what we now call modern medicine. Modern medicine didn't, materialize out of thin air. It emerged slowly as, thinkers in the 17th and 18th centuries began challenging centuries of dogma. For most of human history, medical understanding rested on the ancient Humour's model. Illness was supposedly caused by imbalances of blood, phlegm, and bile. But as observational science gained momentum, physicians such as William Harvey began grounding medicine in anatomy and physiology. Harvey's work on blood circulation in the 17th century wasn't just a clever discovery. It proved that the human body could, in fact, be studied empirically. That shift, turning medicine into a science of evidence instead of tradition, set the foundation for every breakthrough that followed. If you're someone who values practical knowledge, the takeaway is simple. Progress starts when assumptions are tested, measured, and revised. That mindset is as relevant to modern survival practices as it was to early physicians dissecting bodies to understand how they worked. Why the rise of germ theory transformed medicine more than any single discovery? If there is one moment where modern medicine truly begins, it's with the acceptance of germ theory in the 19th century. Before Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, doctors didn't believe microorganisms caused disease. This sounds absurd now, but at the time it was a radical claim that went against centuries of belief. Pasteur's experiments showed that microbes spoiled food, and Koch identified specific bacteria responsible for illnesses like tuberculosis and cholera. Once this idea took hold, everything changed. Sterilization, hygiene, quarantine, and eventually vaccinations took on new meaning. Suddenly, medicine had an enemy it could see under a microscope. Germ theory didn't just save lives. It reorganized how societies understood disease control. If you're thinking practically, this knowledge still applies in crisis scenarios. Understanding how pathogens spread allows you to make smarter decisions about sanitation, water purification and infection control, especially in off-grid or emergency situations where modern infrastructure might not be available. How anesthesia and antiseptics made surgery a tool for healing instead of a last resort. Before the mid-1800s, surgery was often more dangerous than the injury itself. No anesthesia meant patients had to endure the knife fully conscious, and with no knowledge of sterilization, infections claimed countless lives. Two breakthroughs changed that. First came anesthesia, ether and chloroform, turning surgery from a frantic race into a controlled procedure. Then came Joseph Lister's introduction of antiseptics, inspired directly by germ theory. By using carbolic acid to sterilize instruments and wounds, he cut surgical mortality rates dramatically. These changes opened the door to complex surgeries that had been unthinkable: limb reconstructions, abdominal procedures, and eventually organ transplants. For a survivalist or historian, the lesson is that technique matters as much as tools. Even without modern hospitals, the principles Lister established — clean hands, sterilized instruments, controlled environments — can make the difference between life and death when dealing with wounds in remote settings. How vaccines and antibiotics reshaped human survival on a global scale. The 20th century marked the moment medicine went from treating individuals to safeguarding entire populations. Vaccines existed earlier. Edward Jenner's smallpox vaccine in the late 1700s was, truly revolutionary. But it wasn't until the modern era that mass vaccination campaigns and global disease control efforts really took shape. Polio, smallpox, measles, diseases that shaped history for millennia, eventually fell under medical control. But the real giant, honestly, was antibiotics. When Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in 1928, he sparked a medical revolution that turned once fatal infections into, manageable conditions. It's impossible to overstate how much this shifted human survival. Wars changed because soldiers survived infected wounds. Cities expanded because outbreaks could be controlled. For practical application, understanding antibiotic history helps you avoid misuse. Antibiotic resistance grows when they're overused or used improperly. Knowing how they work and their limits keeps you prepared for scenarios where access may be limited or resistance becomes a real threat. How modern medicine continues to evolve and why its history matters. Today, we live in a world shaped by imaging technologies, genetic research, trauma medicine, and public health strategies that earlier generations couldn't have imagined. Yet every innovation traces back to the turning points we just walked through: empirical science, germ theory, anesthesia, antiseptics, vaccines, and antibiotics. The history isn't just academic, it's practical knowledge for understanding how systems collapse, adapt, or advance under pressure. Survivalists can, apply these lessons directly by mastering sanitation principles, wound care fundamentals, disease transmission awareness, and rational decision-making based on observed evidence. Historians gain a deeper appreciation of how medicine didn't evolve smoothly, but rather in fits and starts, pushed forward by individuals willing to challenge accepted truth. And, well, anyone watching this channel gets a clearer sense of how modern society rests on a medical framework that is both powerful and, honestly, quite fragile. If you found this guide valuable and want more deep dive history content like this, make sure you subscribe, share the channel with fellow enthusiasts, and help keep these stories alive.